Welcome everyone. We're just waiting for everyone just to log in to the webinar. So we'll be starting shortly. We should be starting in about a minute's time. So just bear with us as everyone starts hooking up to the webinar. Won't be long. All right, what we might do, we might get started. We've got a busy program ahead of us. We've got big mix of speakers, but I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting today, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects, or my respects, to the elders past and present, as well as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are joining us today. My name is George Descala, and I'm from Global Victoria, and welcome to the first virtual Victorian e-commerce network. Of course, this couldn't be delivered without our partners, Asialink, and Nick Henderson and his team have been working together in putting this, this webinar on. We've been overwhelmed with the response. It's been an absolutely fantastic response and very appreciative. Global Victoria actually has a network of 23 offices around the world. They're there to set up companies like yourselves, exporters, and in particular in this time, in this strange time that we find ourselves in, those offices are still operating and are there to help you. So please, if you're interested, it's a great time to engage with these offices. They are desperate and really keen to be working with you. So it's a great time to make contact and to find out what they can do for you. We'll be hearing from one of our officers today, actually Tim Dillon, the Commissioner for China, and also Michael Zhang from our Shanghai office. So you'll hear more detail. I'd also like to take this time to thank our speakers for participating in today's seminar, Michael Norris, Tim Brown, and of course, Tim Dillon, our Commissioner, and of course, Nick Henderson, and Kathy, of course, from Austrade. So one last thing that I will ask before I let you go is we are keen on your feedback and what you are, your experience of this webinar today. So please, give us the feedback. We would love to hear from you and to know how we can make these events even better for you. Thank you very much and enjoy today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Nick Henderson. I'm the Director of China Practice at Asialink Business, and it's great to be with you and to moderate this event. As George mentioned, we have some great experience and insights that we'll get from the panel today that will be sharing information on a topic that I know is of real interest to everybody. And that is, what's the post-COVID-19 landscape looking like in China? And in particular, how that sort of relates to the e-commerce, consumer, and key product category areas. China was the first country impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic earlier this year, suffering a period of large-scale disruption to society, tragic human toll, and economic shock. The country ground to a halt right at the time when there was this mass movement of people during Chinese New Year. And China, over the past months, has started to get back onto the path of what we call a new normal. And we will slowly see over time what that new normal looks like, but early indications are showing that a key part of that recovery will be driven by China's large digital economy, it'll be driven by consumption, and it'll be driven through China's myriad of online platforms and marketplaces. Before I introduce our first panelist, just some housekeeping for this event. We have some time set aside at the end of today's event for Q&A. We welcome your questions, and if you'd like to submit one, you can do so by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Feel free to specify whom you would like to ask that question to as well, and we will aim to answer questions as time permits. So firstly, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Dillon. Victorian Government Commissioner to Greater China, to share some insights from on the ground and ways that the Victorian Government is supporting businesses during this time. Tim has spent 2 decades representing Victoria internationally in Japan, Malaysia and China, and oversees a network of Victorian Government trade and investment offices in Shanghai, Nanjing, Beijing, Chengdu and Hong Kong. Thank you, Tim, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. And it's great to see so many Victorian companies here today. As mentioned, my role is heading up the Victorian Government's network of offices in China, of which we have 5, headquartered in Shanghai, but also in Beijing, Nanjing, Chengdu, and Hong Kong. And I'm really pleased to say all our offices are fully open and operational. The staff are currently working with Victorian companies and Chinese potential investors to facilitate business, and that's very pleasing to see. We're also hearing on the ground that China, and particularly Shanghai, has also really started to recover strongly from the virus. And you know, subways are packed, restaurants are open, people are going out, so business is getting back to normal. Although there are some headwinds, and I'll talk about that. I didn't want to take up too much time because we have a great panel of speakers coming up, and I'd like to acknowledge them now. Austrade, Healthmore and Agency China, who will go into some detail around the e-commerce. But I did want to touch on, as Nick mentioned, coming up, some of the Victorian Government support for companies that we're planning to assist our companies to re-engage with China. One of the first points I want to make, though, is that when it comes to recovery, it's important to acknowledge that Australia at the moment has not had the same level of infections as other countries such as Italy, Spain, the UK and the US. And if we manage to remain like this, we will be well positioned to potentially capitalise on that and have strong trade with China. And I do want to stress that a recovery will happen. I know at the moment it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel, and things can be quite despondent with all the negative media going on, but a recovery will happen. And if you looked past pandemics, and there's been a number, they have all caused major losses, but have also all had strong recoveries where growth has resumed at the original output path from before the shock. That's called a V-shaped recovery, where there's a sharp decline followed by a sharp rise. That's one potential scenario for China, and I think it'll depend on sectors and may even have geographical focused overlays to it as well, but I'll touch on some other scenarios shortly. If we look back on the history and we consider what happened with SARS back in 2003, which was an epidemic in Hong Kong and China that also had impacts across Southeast Asia, we saw very sharp falls in GDP, followed by equally as sharp gains immediately after. I know for a fact that Victoria, tourists to Victoria after SARS, we had the largest growth rate for Chinese tourists coming into Australia immediately after SARS. It rebounded extremely quickly. This is a bit different. It's probably going to be a longer, more drawn out one, and it's obviously broader, but I still think that when the time comes, we will see a fairly quick rebound. And it's good for us to be preparing for that. The SARS epidemic was also the catalyst for Alibaba and JD.com to launch their e-commerce businesses. Alibaba at the time was just a 4-year-old company in 2003, focused on B2B e-commerce, matching American procurement teams with Chinese suppliers. JD.com, the second largest one after Alibaba, at the time was just a small chain of electronic shops that had launched an online e-commerce site. At the time, JD had, I think, 12 offline stores in Beijing, mostly selling electronics such as CDs and camcorders. Not surprisingly, with the travel bans restricting people-to-people sort of movement, we have seen an increased adoption and companies turning to e-commerce sites, specifically Alibaba's online stores, to facilitate trade and continue that. With the rapid growth of B2B business out of the SARS virus, Jack Ma then launched Taobao, the C2C platform, in July 2003 to tap into the local marketplace in China. By the end of 2003, the other one, JD.com, had also opened their first e-commerce website called 360 Buy, which is now what is JD.com marketplace today. But if we go back to today and COVID-19, similarly, a health pandemic opened new opportunities in e-commerce, with major platforms seeing an increase of 10% in revenue in the first quarter of this year, while traditional retail has seen forced closures and huge losses. So that's a 10% increase in revenues year on year, or for the quarter, compared to the previous year for Alibaba and JD.com. Interestingly, it has also opened e-commerce to new consumers, with the highest growth in new users coming from people aged over 45, and geographically from 3rd and 4th tier cities. So if SARS initiated, I suppose, the e-commerce drive, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is that it's turbocharged e-commerce. And China's capitalizing on that now. We've just seen the State Council in April approve the establishment of what they're calling integrated pilot zones for cross-border e-commerce. And they've approved 46 cities and regions, new ones, and that's on top of the existing 59. So they're trying to double their reach. But I'll leave other speakers to talk on this in more detail. As I mentioned before, there is a risk that this sharp downturn doesn't rebound quickly, like what happened in the 2008 GFC, where GDP growth has continually been slower than prior to the downturn. This is called a U-shaped or an L-shaped shock, and can have lasting effects on the economy. And it's for this reason that governments, both in China but also Australia and in Victoria, have put so much effort into stimulus packages. China, as I mentioned earlier, is well on the way to recovering. And according to the National Development Reform Commission, virtually all manufacturing businesses are up and running at around 95% capacity, while more than 80% of SMEs have reopened. But as Nick mentioned, they are focusing on domestic consumption to drive growth. And there are some significant challenges still around this. It's estimated in China that there's something like 26 million job losses, which will have a flow-on effect for domestic consumption. And in another report, it's estimated that potentially up to 25% of restaurants may not reopen. Add to this trade tensions with America, but other locations as well. The difference in geographical recoveries, England, Spain, Italy, Europe will be much slower, I think, than Australia. That's also going to have an impact on their trade. Not to mention the build-up of inventories that companies will have, which of course they'll look to get those out before they start importing and replacing those. So China, after initially spending big on stimulus to keep the economy ticking over during the worst of the outbreak in late January and February, is now rolling out support packages for companies for trade, consumption, FDI promotion, and for incentivizing companies and universities to hire recent graduates to manage employment. Other initiatives that they're doing include credit and loan insurance to increase financing for trade, funds for developing distribution and supply chains, supporting supplies of essential goods, tax breaks, cash injections into business, and free utilities. Just last week, we saw Shanghai government and many other governments or cities around China running shopping campaigns and providing shopping vouchers to citizens up to 500 RMB is what I've heard. As I mentioned previously, Australia is ahead of several other countries in containing the spread of the virus, and we therefore should be able to recover faster and regain or increase our presence in the China market. In Victoria, to support businesses and workers, the government released a 1.7 billion economic survival and jobs package, which will include a sizable fund to help exporters. We expect this to be released soon, and it will focus on ensuring companies can continue exporting to priority markets, including China. The measures will have a strong focus on e-commerce, with work in progress to deliver the first ever virtual trade mission in collaboration with Alibaba, live streaming wine tasting events for Victorian wineries on JD.com, pop-up stores and promotions on major e-commerce platforms. And as we roll those out, we'll make sure our companies are informed. We'd love to engage with you and have you participate in that. Furthermore, Global Victoria will run a 100-company strong trade mission, or I should say maybe 100+ trade mission in November, if travel allows, to the 3rd China International Import Expo, CIIE, in Shanghai, where Victoria, for the first time, will have our own stand in the F&B pavilion. There are some risks around that, we recognise that, but there's also ways that we could do that virtually and have companies with their agents or representatives in market attend on their behalf. But that's an area too that we recognise that when the time is right to travel, it's important for relationships that we get as many of our companies back into the market and building on those relationships and that time advantage that we may have as quickly as possible. Expressions of interest for eligible companies is now available on the Global Victoria website, and I encourage you all to go in and have a look at that. Finally, I want to stress that, as I mentioned earlier, our Global Victoria offices are open and our team in China are all back at work. Fortunately today, we have a short video that we might play where one of our team members went out to some of the supermarkets and retailers just to show what was on the shelves there and give you a flavour of the market. Unfortunately, this was done at short notice, so we didn't have permission from many of the retail outlets to film. So it was a very quick job. But I think the important thing is to note the names of the retail outlets where you see these products. We all, our officers and our staff have relationships with them, and we use those as a platform to engage and get your products not only online, but where possible into retail outlets as well. So we might just quickly play that video if we may, Sarah. So that was just a few of the stores that we're dealing with in market, but we have similar relationships all across the network. And so we'll be working hard to get you both online, but also offline where we can. I wanted to end by recognising that while we have a team in China, that's not possible without the team we have in Melbourne who support us. And that's led by George Descala and Song Lei, as well as Lizzie Moffat, who are all online here today. And they make sure that we bridge the link between our companies in Victoria and us in market and make that as seamless and as easy as possible for you. So we're happy to talk about business entry plans. We're happy to identify distributors, importers. We're happy to look at any issues that you may be facing as an obstacle to your business. Please reach out. My final point will be that while we're in market, there's also plenty of other support from others. You'll be hearing soon, hopefully, from a speaker from Austrade who do a great job, but you also have Asialink who have great capability. You have the Australia Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, Auscham, as well as Beijing. All of these sources are available for you to get into the market. So I encourage you to talk to as many people as you can, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you all, and I'll hand back to Nick now.
Thank you very much, Tim. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Michael Norris, who is Research and Strategy Manager for Agency China. And Michael is based in Shanghai and has really deep expertise in a number of consumer categories, FMCG categories, and the Chinese consumer. And looking forward to hearing his insights into what's been happening over the last period during COVID-19 and also some emerging opportunities. So I'd like to warmly introduce Michael Norris.
All right. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Nick. A quick thanks to Global Victoria and Asialink Business for putting on a fantastic event. And hello to all attendees joining us today. It's an absolute privilege to join you from Shanghai, China. I looked at the attendance list beforehand and I saw a number of familiar names and familiar faces. So it's great to see you again. Many of you I met last year during Global Victoria's AFL related events up in Shanghai. And if you remember me speaking that time, you know that I generally have a lot to say, but not a lot of time to say it in. So let's light this candle. Okay, just looking to share the screen. A slight technical issue on my end. If there's someone from Asialink that's listening, if I push those buttons, I'm not getting any sort of response on my end. Okay, so I'm just looking to...
Hi there, Michael. Would you maybe just want to start on some of your delivery and we'll get the technical issue up.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Up Thank you
absolutely.
very much.
That'd be great. So, look, as Nick correctly stated, China was the first economy to feel the impacts of COVID-19, and it's shaping up to be the first economy to be able to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would love to be able to... Oh, great. Okay, fantastic. So let's just get back up to speed. This is really the chart that is the genesis for today's presentation. And that is to say that despite everything that's happened, you still have online sales delivering positive growth at a time when other parts of the economy aren't doing fantastically well. And that's really the genesis of today's presentation, and we'll be going through some of the opportunities associated with that particular set of events. Just to set the scene today, I'm going to do three things. Very quickly go through China's e-commerce landscape. Don't worry, it's not a snooze fest. It's just a couple of snappy slides to be able to show you where we're at. I'm going to quickly go through some of our own research, survey pulses that we conducted in February and March, to be able to show you that March was really the month where we started to see some turnaround in the categories that the attendees are particularly focused in, whether it's skincare, whether it's nutrition, whether it's nutraceuticals. And the lion's share of my time today will be spent on a couple of opportunities, some of which are COVID related, whereas others are latent opportunities that we see in market. Okay, so quickly, e-commerce is a big deal in China. Depending on whose numbers you read, it's about a quarter of all retail sales. So for every $4 of retail spend, $1 is spent through online. That's a different picture by category. And for those attendees that are focused on skincare, the line that you should be looking at there is that green line. And all things being equal, we should see a 40% of skincare sales being online by 2021. And to Tim's point, really what we're going to see is we're going to reach that number a lot quicker by virtue of what's happened. Consumers are looking to get access to what they want, looking to take advantage of the selection that online provides, but without the risk necessarily of being out and about. This graph, just a different set of numbers. All I want to show here is that the real winner over the last 5 to 10 years in China's retail landscape has been online, that red chunk there, growing very strongly. And the size of the prize is significant. And what it means for consumer packaged goods companies is that you need strong ability to be able to build a brand online and to be able to move units online as well. The last, went too fast. The last slide in this quick overview is just the who's who of China's e-commerce. On the left-hand side, you see general e-commerce. So if you've got all the business licenses to be able to trade generally in China, that's the e-commerce landscape dominated very much by Alibaba. And then on the right, you have the cross-border e-commerce landscape. And within that landscape, you'll see that the Alibaba owned or invested platforms are in red, and they're numbers 1 and 2, but it's a little bit more fragmented, and fragmented to the point where a lot of our clients and their competitors launch on cross-border e-commerce via multiple platforms rather than just picking one. So all of that combined, e-commerce is a big deal in China, it's a growing deal, and cross-border e-commerce is fragmented, and you should consider, if you haven't already, being across multiple platforms. So when it comes to the pandemic impact, there are a couple of ways to read these slides. All that I ask is that when you look at these slides, the gray area is bad, and the orange-red area means good. And so what we saw initially in February was that alcohol and cosmetics, two things that we are calling social discretionary spend that relies a lot on you going out and about, suffered, whereas other things, especially skincare and personal care, held relatively steady. So we like that. The better news was that even though you had folks spending a little bit less on things like skincare, they continued to engage with the category in February. What do I mean by that? That they were spending time on their phones, looking at things like tutorials, reviews, and live streams. And so the guidance that we were giving clients all throughout February was that you might see a drop in expenditure, but your consumers are getting more and more savvy about the category. They're learning more about the category, and you can expect them to come out, not just with an appetite to purchase, but also they're going to be more discerning in terms of their purchases. And then in March, we saw a real nice shift in terms of consumer expenditure. A few things happened in March. The first is that what started as a small trickle of folks back to work in February was a steady stream in March. So most folks went back to work in March. You started to have retail precincts open up in March as well. And so there was a need to be out and about and to be seen again. And of course, that means good things for the top two lines there, skincare and cosmetics. And the last thing that happened in March was that you had Queen's Day, which is the largest e-commerce festival that we had so far this year. And that gave consumers the reason and the opportunity to be able to shop their favorite brands at favorable prices. So in March, we were already seeing some really positive signs. It's May now. And so when it comes to the consumer, the message that I want to be giving you here is for the categories that you're concerned about, looking good, feeling good, and protecting oneself, we're seeing the purse strings being opened there with consumers that are a little bit more savvy about the particular categories that they're in. Now, on to the lion's share of this presentation. I've got 4 opportunities here. In the interest of time, I'll go through them pretty swiftly, but not as quickly as I've just spoken then. 2 opportunities are COVID related, and then 2 opportunities are areas that we feel there's a mismatch between consumer needs and what's available on the market. Let's start with the opportunities that are COVID related. Now, the thing about being in China right now is that we're all wearing these, and we're all wearing these essentially all day, every day in heat. And one of the interesting things that happens when you wear one of these bad boys for any length of time is that you start to see fine lines. And that's bad news for China's age-conscious consumers. Now, just to give you an idea of how age-conscious, the average anti-aging consumer in China is now 24 years old, down from 26 a couple of years ago. And so the pressure that this creates on your face means that we are seeing an uptick in things like correcting tools, context-specific eye masks. Folks are looking to use serums and ampules for fast relief as opposed to creams. So they're looking to trade up and go directly to serums and ampules to be able to see fast-acting effects. And you're also looking at folks who are looking for specific ingredient profiles to be able to take the sting out of some of those fine lines. Interestingly as well, when you've got one of these on, is that your eyes and your hair become the most visible feature. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of consumers who are maybe too early into the anti-aging bracket, so 20 to 25, are still spending a lot of time and a lot of money thinking about how to hydrate, make your eye skin area more luminous, and to achieve a depuffing effect as well as sort of ancillary spend in color cosmetics, especially around the eyes. So the eyes are the window to the soul. And in the context of a face mask, they're also one of the most visible parts and a part that's going to increase in prominence. So let's here, if you've got a range of eye creams or if you've got the capability to do things around eye skincare, I want you to be thinking about those particular opportunities, whether it's relief, whether it's prevention, those are all good spaces to play in. Next up is when you're wearing one of these in summer, so we're talking 30-degree heat, it is going to be a bad news for your skin condition. Indeed, there's already a word for this called 口罩脸, which is mask face, not face mask, mask face, which refers to having blemishes and breakouts because your the air's trapped inside the mask and you're wearing it for a protracted period of time. And so what we're going to be seeing is more and more spot treatments that are directed towards humidity rather than hormonal related factors. We're going to be seeing more exfoliation. And because you're increasing the frequency of exfoliation, it means that you need to use gentler exfoliants. And so there's going to be some really encouraging opportunities there. In terms of the antibacterial properties, so hot air trapped on your face for any length of time, consumers are going to be looking at ingredient profiles that have things like tea tree oil, lavender, zinc. And you're also going to be seeing folks try and prep their skin and give them a better line of defense with things like skin barrier recovery creams. And the last thing is that when you are putting this off and on, that friction creates some level of discomfort. So things like comfortable mists in formats that are suitable to be able to carry around are going to be an interesting profile. And also, if you think a little bit more deeply about what all that humidity means, it means that creams, at least in the interim, won't be the go-to. We'll look to go to something a little bit lighter, like a gel, and that's important in both female skincare and male skincare as well. Males, of course, being a little bit more open to gel-based skincare products. So thinking here about new grooming habits and what it means and how you can insert yourself in new rituals that come with taking care of your skin, especially as you have a mask on in pretty strong heat. Okay, so those are our COVID-related opportunities. Now some non-COVID related ones that we think there's a mismatch between consumer expectations and what's on offer in market. You all know about nighttime recovery for skincare. Chinese consumers view the night, that period of sleep, as a strategic point in a skincare routine that has a lot of leverage that you can repair your skin with or get it in a better condition for the next day. But extending that idea of recovery a little bit, we're starting to see consumers get concerned about their quality of sleep. And so you will have seen increases in things like melatonin, sprays and mists for pillows to be able to give you a better night's sleep, and even sleep tech like a better mattress. But thinking about recovery there in an even broader sense, I think we'll see some really interesting opportunities in terms of pain relief. So for instance, bad backs or even spine and shoulder injuries from sitting at a computer for a protracted period of time. Think about the opportunities there for nighttime relief applications that can go on after a shower. Also think about recovery for consumers that have been subjected to some sort of surgery. So you have one of the highest instances in the world in China of women with cesarean sections. That scarring and being able to come in as a savior for some of that scarring, and thinking about a nighttime formulation that works a little bit better, or a little bit proactively, that's a good idea. Also thinking about other forms of surgery as well. So you have around 20 million cosmetic procedures in China each year. So light bruising and things that can take away some of that visible distress to the skin at night, also good ideas. And then thinking away from humans for a moment, in terms of pet care, if you're part of that particular category, well, thinking about nighttime repair, joint repair specifically for active and larger dog breeds is an interesting area that we don't think enough folks have their mind to. So a couple of opportunities there in nighttime recovery. Just going on to the last opportunity that I'll share, and then quickly handing back to our fantastic moderator, Nick. 1 second. Hopefully we go to the next slide. Okay, let me talk about it. Hopefully it appears on your screen. Weight management. Now in China, we've reached an interesting point in fitness whereby there are a number of different weight and body management groups and niche markets. So there are folks that are looking to get slim. We all knew that. There are folks that are looking to get toned. And there are also an increasing number of folks that are looking to get jacked. Not jacked in the same way that we understand it, but in a culturally more sensitive way that speaks to increased confidence in one's physicality. And so what that creates is it creates a number of interesting segments. And so what I think the key takeaway around weight management or muscle mass products here is that the one size fits all that we had, or that the market has seen over the past couple of years, I don't think that's viable. I think you're going to see an increasing level of sophistication and nuance when it comes to marrying what consumers want in terms of their ideal weight and body shape, and in terms of the supplements and the additional I guess helpers that they can get there. And one of the interesting things to look at is some of the R&D that's coming through right now. So in the top left-hand corner, you'll have a Korean proposition. That is a Korean proposition which has taken off recently because it speaks to a slim and cut body shape figure. And so that range of supplements and weight management products is directly associated with a particular body type. And that's the level of specificity that we're going to be seeing in market. In terms of some of the local competitors, the one on the top right there, Wonderlab, do a fantastic job. They've worked out a consistency and a flavor profile that is a little bit better suited to local consumer needs. So the old vanilla chocolate strawberry formulation profile, I don't think is going to be able to cut it in the future. You're going to be looking at, for consumers that are looking for all the benefits of those weight management or body management profiles, but with some local flavor profiles or flavor profiles that suit local palates better. One of the interesting open questions in fitness and weight management is, well, what do I eat pre and post gym? That warm up and recovery, whether, you know, the sort of the Gatorade gummies and chews, I don't think that that's the right direction. I think there's going to be some more interesting directions around that warm up and recovery space, and those are interesting places to play in. And then the last one that I want to just touch on here, especially for weight management and the level of individualization that consumers are looking for, bottom right-hand corner there is a proposition called Lemon Box. What they do is they get you to fill out a health questionnaire on a periodic basis, and then they prescribe you particular supplements based on your body management goals and also how you're feeling, energy levels, etc. They'll ramp that up to a periodic blood test. And so what it means is that you'll have consumers receiving pill packs that are specifically tailored to their previous couple of months blood test results. That's the level of specificity that we need to be thinking at. And so for Victorian businesses in this space, really looking for you to be a lot more sensitive and dialed into the different types of weight and body shape profiles, and then being able to construct propositions around those. So those are the 4 opportunities, 2 COVID related ones, especially around masks, thinking about fine lines and also thinking about skin irritation and blemishes, and then 2 others, an expanded definition of recovery, and then also more nuance around weight management. Just a note about us. Agency China is a local company based in China. We do the full gamut from research, coming up with interesting opportunities like these, to the digital marketing, all the way through to the e-commerce. If there is a part of the presentation that triggered a brainwave, feel free to get in touch with me, or you can drop us a question in the Q&A. Very much looking forward to your questions, and you've been a fabulous audience. Looking forward to sharing with you a little bit more. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. You certainly triggered a few brainwaves, and your deep insights into a couple of categories were fantastic. And that level of detail is the sort of insight that businesses need to have to understand how to navigate some of the opportunities in China. And as we can see from skincare, it's becoming a very nuanced and sophisticated category in China as well as it is in other parts of the world. The skincare opportunities you mentioned are interesting and show how COVID-19 related niche opportunities can be created in this instance to address skin irritations from wearing face masks. And you made the point that categories where there are the most opportunities in this environment are those that focus on looking good, feeling good, and protecting oneself. So thank you again, Michael. It's my pleasure now to introduce Kathy Liu, Senior Business Development Manager for Austrade in Greater China, based in Shanghai. Kathy has led the China e-commerce team since 2015 and has a deep knowledge of the e-commerce ecosystems, including platforms, distributors, and assists Australian companies to navigate this landscape. We really look forward to hearing your perspectives. So over to you, Kathy.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. I believe most of you who have signed up for today's webinar is fully aware that e-commerce is coming back to the center of the stage during COVID-19. Since the beginning of the lockdown, there's a wider demographic of consumers switching to online shopping, especially for their daily essentials. Fresh produce online retailers such as Hema Fresh, JD Fresh, Ding Dong, and Miss Fresh, they all had more than 300% increase in their day-to-day business. People on the voluntary quarantine tend to do more home cooking and buy all of their ingredients online. And this online shopping trend is expected to continue even after COVID-19. While during the lockdown, we noticed that most people were focusing on the essentials for their day-to-day needs. Since the work resumption in mid-March, we noticed that the consumption of non-essentials are coming back. Tmall has recently released a consumer trend report collecting data from their consumers during the May Day holiday, which was a nationwide holiday from the 5th to the 5th of May in China. Tmall Global alone reported a 41% year-on-year growth in their imported products category, among which digital appliances had an increase of 380%, and cosmetics also had an increase of 42% compared to the same period last year. We also had a conversation with Tmall recently, and we were advised that healthcare products is another category which has great potential both during and after COVID-19. Tmall has actually forecasted this trend at the very beginning of the virus outbreak. However, they still underestimated the real growth in this sector, which has literally caused a shortage of supply in products like vitamins and health supplements. Well, in spite of all these opportunities, though, simply have your presence on e-commerce is not enough. This is where digital marketing comes into place. China now have an online user of 900 million, among whom 710 million are online shoppers, and we have 506 million live streaming users. Almost no brand nowadays can survive in China without doing some live streaming. Traditionally, live streaming was all about engaging a KOL, key opinion leader, who has substantial number of followers on social media platforms. Recently, a well-known Australian beverage brand has engaged the #1 live stream host on Taobao Live, who talked about their products for 3 minutes during her 3.5 hours live streaming session, which attracted 18 million audiences. They have prepared 6,000 sets of stock for the live streaming, and all of them got sold out in a couple of seconds. But the cost of engaging a top-notch live streaming host can go up to as much as 50 grand Aussie dollars. I guess most SMEs do not have a deep pocket to conduct such kind of marketing activities. But fortunately, China digital marketing sector is a very diversified space. You can always find your own market niche, engage your own key opinion consumers rather than engaging very expensive key opinion leaders to create your own private traffic to attract consumers to your products and brands, and cultivate your consumer stickiness, which is a very similar brand, a very similar concept to brand loyalty in traditional sense of marketing. So in summary, e-commerce is not a trend anymore. It's an essential element of doing business in China. That's all from me. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for those insights. And it's interesting that a lot of those trends or a lot of those behaviours that took place during the lockdown period are starting to sustain into normal life in post-COVID environments, which is, I think, something for everybody to watch as time evolves. It's now my pleasure to introduce Tim Brown, Chief Business Officer of Healthmore, a leading cross-border e-commerce distribution firm working closely with a large number of local brands in categories like skincare, health and wellness, and other categories. Tim has extensive experience in cross-border e-commerce, logistics, technology, business and sales operations, and has had previous roles focusing on cross-border e-commerce with Australia Post. We look forward to Tim's insights from a distribution and e-commerce platform operator perspective. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Nick. G'day everyone, thanks very much for joining. I'd like to say a quick thanks to the speakers who were speaking before. They set the scene really nicely, awesome insights into the channel and opportunities for businesses here. Thanks to Asialink and Global Victorian Government for the opportunity to speak today. Always a pleasure to share some of our insights into what's going on in cross-border e-commerce. I'm going to focus my approach on how we have been working to keep orders flowing to Australian and New Zealand businesses through this period. That doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about the human and the economic costs that people are facing at this time. It's an incredibly hard time for so many industries at the moment, and it's not lost on me how our experience has been quite different to that and how fortunate I am and we are to be part of this industry. So let me give a super quick intro into who we are and what we do for anyone who doesn't know. We buy stock from Australia and New Zealand brands. That's what we do as a distributor. We consolidate and we distribute that locally, or we ship it to China or to Hong Kong for fulfillment to end users in China via cross-border e-commerce. And we do all of that according to a strategy that was set in place with the brand. Now, we're over 350 people in our company, the majority of which are based in China. So we've got offices and teams in Melbourne, Sydney, Auckland, Hong Kong, Kaifeng, Zhengzhou, and Hangzhou as well. And our category coverage, look, we cover all the major categories: VMS, mother, father and baby, beauty, skincare, personal care, home and hygiene, food, snacks, fashion. And we're always open to a conversation about something that we're not carrying at the moment as well. I'm specifically speaking about cross-border e-commerce via the Healthmore lens, what we buy and what we sell, and the partners and brands that we work with, and how COVID has impacted our operations. I don't claim to know every trend that's going on in China or to be a China expert. I just know what we buy and what we sell and how that's going for us. Now, I just want to quickly reflect. In 2019, all that we spoke about was regulation changes in cross-border e-commerce, and this was the big conversation point. And even early in January, when I presented to EGO, we were totally focused on how the regulation changes were going to impact 2020. And then COVID struck. From then until now, we've really gone through 3 stages of our business. A period of uncertainty, which has swiftly become a renewed confidence and vigor. There's now an entirely addictive uplift. I totally feared that this was going to end our journey. When it first hit, the question was, how are people going to shop in a lockdown? People aren't going to be able to shop, they're not going to be able to receive their goods. We didn't know what a lockdown was. On the flip side, we had a bit of confidence that if customers could still buy things online and have them delivered, we were positioned really well. And we're positioned well because we've got a lot of stock in China all the time, really strong logistics and good relationships on both sides to keep that going. But the question remained, what would Chinese people buy? I mean, even here, no one predicted that toilet paper would be the hero SKU for our lockdown. So there was a level of uncertainty with all of this. Reflections aside, generally, we're about 20% up through this period compared to last year. We sent over 150 pallets per week through March. In February, we were ordering $3 million of stock per week. In March, we were ordering $5 million worth of stock. And in April, that's up to $7 million. Yesterday, we ordered $1.5 million worth of purchase orders from brands here in Australia. 30 to 35% of our orders are from Vic brands through this time. So it's a big yay for all the Vic brands who are listening out there, and also to all of our partners that we work with. Categories I'll come back to soon. Look, aside from a few outliers, what we're experiencing is an overall uplift, which is coupled with demand for new brands. So it's really exciting. We have been sending stock. Logistics is an issue. It just costs more. So sending volume is crucial. So because we play at a higher rate with a lot of volume going across, we're able to work with that. And parcel costs definitely impact Daigou, but let's not reduce the role that they play to shipping of an item. The connections, the sharing, the marketing is still massive for all of us. It's really solidified the role that Daigou play in cross-border e-commerce. There's so much information out there, sometimes it can freeze you. Just keep this in mind from us and the other distributors will be in a similar position. Everything we were selling before is selling now. Plus there's new stuff and new opportunities. Most of that is selling a little more than expected as well. So it's a great time. It didn't end, which was fortunate for me, so I'm still employed, even though I'm wearing track pants and a suit jacket here on this call. 2020 is looking like the year for healthy lifestyle. So that's what we're looking at now. COVID has accelerated that, and Australia and New Zealand are always well positioned to align with those benefits. One key to 2020 will be identifying what does healthy lifestyle mean? And the speakers earlier touched on some of that, not just for us, but for the Chinese consumer. How is it perceived in China? We had a bit of luck with this. We sent a lot of stock in January, which became our buffer. With sales really growing quickly in China, we also have orders from brands which are going up. So we needed that buffer in the middle due to the slower logistics to be able to keep the whole channel moving. So that was a good result. Early days, we saw a big move to protection and prevention, and I think a lot of people thought that would continue. We made the call not to jump into this too heavily. We definitely sold some Dettol, some Equim from Edo, but it wasn't something where we chased masks and all that sort of trading that was going on with that. And it's kind of flattened out now anyway. We've also had successful new brand launches. VMOR's, Defender and Frank Body are all brands that we've brought on board through this time. So we are out having conversations and looking for new things. We're sitting here in Australia with the foundations to drive and to lead cross-border e-commerce, which is great. But global brands are taking the channel incredibly seriously now, and they're seeking distribution from Australia. So I think that that's a trend that we need to look out for in 2020 and could have impacts here. In terms of other impacts and challenges, the obvious impacts are spike in protection and prevention. Infant formula, immunity, health supplements, fresh foods are all experiencing year-on-year growth. Beauty and skincare dropped off a little bit, but is picking back up now, which is good to see. I think Australian brands are having particular success because, well, great brands with great people, naturally healthy associations. We've got long-term commitment to the channel and the key players, which provides us with really strong foundations, ensuring that we can remain present and we can remain relevant. So it's a very resilient channel that we operate in. Challenges, the logistics I've touched on. We shifted from 70-30 FC to 50-50. That's been slower and clunkier, a lot more planning involved. So hats off to the logistics teams that have worked on that. I think for brands, getting componentry and materials in is something that's been a little bit overlooked. I think a lot of support could be directed to that area to make sure that the products can still be made for us to order and to sell. It's a hot time, so it's a really perfect time to act fast and act with conviction. Categories and impacts, I'll skip over this really quickly. So big winners, VMS, 2020 was always going to be a challenge, but we've got a boost there. Fresh food, healthy food, that was predicted last year, that's still a good one. Home and hygiene, I'd be careful in this area. I think it's a good category, but price expectations make it really, really challenging. Biggest opportunities, personal care and hygiene. I think there's fantastic opportunities there that Australia and New Zealand align with really, really well. Biggest challenge, unfortunately, I see that with skincare and beauty, and the guys touched on some of the innovations that are required in that space, but particularly with pressure from China brands and large foreign brands looking to access the Daigou channel in Australia, I think that's going to be a challenge for skincare and beauty. There is, though, a renewed sense of opportunity. If a brand's interested in the channel, it's critical right now to align on expectations and find balance. If I were a brand shoes, I would be looking to invest in really knowing and understanding what does a cross-border e-commerce strategy look like and what does it act like? And I do that by talking to people that actually do it and execute these strategies. So I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone at any time. What do distributors and partners really want? We need to have some frank conversations. How does it work? What can a brand do to support the growth, and what should a distributor be doing to support that brand growth as well? What can I as a brand control, and what might I need to be flexible on to really make this work? What should we be doing now? I think 2020 is going to have to be flexible, but the role that Daigou play continues to be consistent, incredibly resilient. So it's a great time to embrace these people, these friends that we have here, and to recognize them, make them feel valued. If I'm a new brand right now, you've got to realize how competitive it is. Everyone's product is the best. I fall in love with a new brand product every week, but not everyone's approach, pace, or commercials are aligned with what's required in this channel. So I think digging into those parts and getting the approach right will really help you to understand what the potential is for this. For growing and established brands, it's awesome time now to stretch. Let's reinforce your position through new opportunities. And new opportunities, I think, lie in some of the tier 3 and 4 city growth platforms. So good areas to explore this year. For all brands, I suggest keeping an eye out for upcoming events in China too, such as CIBE that Global Vic's involved in. Obviously, we have to think more creatively about participation in trade shows and events, but 100% we need to be there showing support to the consumers and stay right in front of their faces. The key points that I've gone through today: have a critical conversation. It's a good time right now. There's an overall uplift in demand and consumption. We're buying a lot of stock, we're selling a lot of stock, so it's going good. The market's hungry for creative solutions. If you've got some ideas, come and have a chat about them. Let's see if we can work something out. If not with us, there might be other partners that could work really well for you. So it's worthwhile engaging. We're really positioned in Australia and New Zealand to align with consumer demands. And the channel's always evolving, and so that makes it really hard to model and to achieve certainty that so many people want. It takes a lot of time, but you even just look at those dates and the growth for Alibaba and for JD. Everything happens really quick and everything changes really fast. I'll end on this point. We have everything we need sitting right at our doorsteps. A natural association that aligns with what China consumers want. I can't guarantee that a conversation with me will lead to distribution with Health More, but I'm certain that it'll be valuable for your journey. So thanks everyone so much for listening, and look forward to chatting again.
Thank you so much for that, Tim. And it's great to hear that in this environment that there is still some growth, and you've experienced a growth over this period, and sales are up, and there's an increased emphasis on well-being and healthy lifestyles during this time. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. So we now move to the Q&A section of this event. So for those that haven't had a chance to write something in the Q&A box, I encourage you now to think of some questions. We've had some really good insights from our panelists, and we've covered a lot of information. No doubt there are going to be some things which maybe you would like to clarify, or how is that relevant to your particular product area. Certainly welcome you to do that and put that into the Q&A box. Just to let everybody know, because we started slightly late, we are also running a little bit behind time. So in order to still allow some time for Q&A, we will be running slightly over the original end time. So I hope that's okay with everybody as well. I'm just going to see, I might start off, if I may, with a question to Michael. And Michael, I hear that purchase intention in some surveys that are out there that talk relatively generically is down in certain categories. What are you hearing? You know, you focused today and you introduced cosmetics and that sort of product. What about some other categories? What is going on in terms of purchase intention on some discretionary spending in other categories that you're seeing maybe some decreases, or maybe you're also seeing some green shoots like you are with cosmetics?
Understood. Look, I think it's worth just setting out right at the top, the family budget has been affected by everything that's going on. So what you can expect is some folks have unfortunately lost their job, and some other folks have voluntarily taken a pay cut, and that puts a wee bit of pressure on the family budget. All of this comes at a time when your rent isn't necessarily going down, and you've still got to make mortgage repayments, or you've still got to pay off that pay-as-you-go loan. So that financial pressure is still there, particularly for younger consumers. And so there will be some compromises. And one of the things that we have found is, by virtue of the fact that this year won't have any major international travel, or at least one of the major holidays, nobody's really shelling out going overseas, that helps balance the budget just a wee bit. And some other compromises are being made around apparel. So generally speaking, we would see the type of consumers that we work with, opt for a seasonal wardrobe change. But this year, it's been a little bit different. The excitement at buying clothes for the summer has been a little bit more muted, and there's a little bit more of, I'll make do with what I have. So apparel is an area where we think there's going to be some depressed spending. And in terms of what it means in the shopping basket, we observed that folks are actually quite kind to themselves during lockdown. And so we saw an interesting increase in a few different types of white goods, maybe buying a blender or a juicer into the home and experimenting there, or maybe picking up or diverting a coffee habit from going outside to bring it in and trying out instant coffee. But now, as we're back out and about, some of those little treats that people bought themselves, or little experiments that they had to break up the monotony of quarantine, have fallen away. And so the shopping basket doesn't quite look as adventurous as it was during the back end of the lockdown period, as the immediate sort of pressures were off, and folks were feeling a little bit, how does one say, a little bit more adventurous and needed to break up some monotony. So we think that apparel is going to be a wee bit soft, but the categories that we talked about, and I think that Tim gave a really good overview of some of the areas of opportunity, are still very much alive.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Michael. I've got a question which I might ask to Tim Brown in relation to mum and baby category and what you're seeing in terms of baby infant formula and baby skincare trends, because I know you've got some brands that focus in that area. What's been the experience over the last couple of months in those sectors?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think for infant formula, always really strong, and seeing year-on-year growth in that category for sure. The issue that we have is there's so many infant formula brands, but when we talk about infant formula in our channel for Healthmore with cross-border e-commerce, we're really talking about a couple of brands. I'm sure everyone knows who they are. So it becomes difficult because, you know, looking to grow other brands or grow into this channel is quite challenging for new entrants. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just something to consider if you want to be the next A2. You know, you've got to recognise how long they've been in this channel for and all of the foundations that they've set in place as well. In terms of the broader category, you know, we see good opportunities for premium ranges that are safe and organic and work really well and have a good presence here in Australia. I think that's the key thing to focus on. Price points are always going to be an issue. Now, remember, again, we're talking about what we buy. So our customers are used to, you know, really products that work really well, but probably not in that premium price point category. So we have to sort of try to find that balance between what's going to work for the consumer and what we can drive through. I think for anything in that really premium space, I think a different approach is going to be needed other than just straight distribution, where a bit more marketing, seeding, profile building with Daigou and local KOLs is going to be necessary for that. Yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a question also in relation. I know this is the Victorian e-commerce network event, but for businesses, there needs to be consideration for that mix. You know, what is the appropriate mix of online, offline, and actually, does that actually incorporate new retail? I've got a question which I might ask to Kathy Liu in Shanghai. Any insights on the offline market during this time, in particular in relation to supermarket or fruit? And may I perhaps suggest even just touching on a little bit of the hybrid O2O type trends that are occurring as well. But I'll leave that to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
That's a great question. Actually, we were talking about that issue in our WeChat group afternoon. Since the web resumption and consumption is coming back, it's not only all about online. We are seeing offline taking off. For example, one good example of O2O is Hema Fresh. So instead of their online presence, they are doing more offline tasting on imported fish products. They are organizing a lot of activities to encourage more consumption from the consumers. One good advantage of this O2O model is you can have consumers offline going to your shops and taste your products. Meanwhile, they are also doing a live streaming of all these events so that people can also watch them online and they can see the products for themselves through the online streaming, and they can also buy these products online. For the fruit sector, fortunately, the fruit sector was not really affected by COVID-19 a lot, because since the outbreak of the virus, Australian is at the end of the grape season and the mango season, and citrus season has not started yet, and of course cherry season is far away. So recently I've been helping a cherry brand from Victorian trying to get prepared for the next season for a online presence in China. So I think we are seeing a lot of rebounds and consumptions coming back in both the offline and the online sector in China. Hope that answers your question.
It does, Kathy. And while I've got you there, if you wouldn't mind switching on your camera, that would be great. But I have a follow-up question from one of the participants in relation to the regulatory landscape. Now, is there any indication that any of the animal testing cruelty-free related legislation will be relaxed or changed this year that may have implications on cross-border e-commerce?
Thank you, Nick. Actually, I've got some technical issues saying I'm not allowed to start video because the host has stopped it. But anyway, sorry, what was the question?
The question just, yeah, look, I understand the chance of technical issues is always there, so I apologise for that. The question was just in relation to any indications of regulatory shifts in relation to animal testing and the cosmetics regulatory environment at this time.
Okay, I think I'm back on the camera. Yes, we've been watching this space quite closely on the regulatory issues on animal testing for cosmetics. However, we haven't heard any news on lifting this requirement or relaxing the regulations on that. I think the biggest chance for cosmetics brands and products at the moment is still by cross-border e-commerce, because according to the latest update in the cross-border e-commerce sector, it looks like we will continue to have this policy, which was supposed to be a pilot policy. This policy is seemed to continue for, I don't know, maybe forever. So the cross-border e-commerce channel is always open, and for cosmetics and skincare products, you can always enter into the Chinese market by this channel.
Thank you very much for that, Kathy. A question for both Tim Dillon and George Descala. What's the best time or what's the best way to get engaged with Global Victoria? How do I get considered for trade missions? At times it can be hard to engage. Would you like to provide some insights on how people can connect and engage with Global Victoria?
I'll take that one. Definitely contact us directly. My email address, george.descala@global.vic.gov.au. In terms of going on a trade mission, it's really about how prepared a company is. We do want to ensure that companies are prepared, have the right systems, have the right product, and we work with them and have those discussions with them through that process. So please get in contact. You can also get in contact with us through the website. There are contact details on the website, but please email me, or you can get my contact number that'll be accompanied with this presentation that'll be shared with everyone on the link.
Thank you very much, George.
Nick, it's Tim here. Tim Dillon. Yeah, so in the first instance, if you're Victorian based, I think it's always recommended to touch base with George and his team, so they have line of sight on who's engaging with what market, and then when we have market specific trade missions, they can send you invites. But if you're also very keen to reach out directly to our officers and have specific questions around the China market and regions, market entry strategies, it might be helping with a little bit of due diligence behind the scenes on a potential importer or distributor, by all means, send me an email. You can either do that through George, or I'm happy to share that as well. And Nick, perhaps we might somehow post or share with everyone email contacts if that's helpful. I'm more than happy to share mine and have it shared with others.
Fantastic. I think that's the intention, Tim, and I believe, just for everybody's benefit, that there will be a link of the recording from today's webinar provided, and also there'll be a version of the slide deck that will be made available to everybody as well. So that's just additional information for everyone. I have a question for Michael, and it's just following on from another question we had about supermarket and food. What's the landscape, or how is the landscape changing for fresh food products such as vegetables, fruit, meat, and dairy at this time?
Great question. So when it comes to fruit, vegetables, meat and dairy, one of the things to be on the lookout for is really national and local government, how does one say, pronouncements about what to be eating to be a little bit healthy. So the Chinese dairy lobby was very clever and petitioned to have dairy front and center of immunity as a way to be able to say, look, if you're having a lifestyle that's a little bit more sedentary, if you're at home a little bit more, then having more calcium in your diet and all the good things that dairy provides is a good idea. And that got taken up. So it's always interesting to see some of that lobbying activity and how that translates into consumers' perceptions around particular categories. I would say that when it comes to fruit, vegetables, and this touches on something that Kathy said earlier, is that we still have this propensity, especially among younger consumers, to try and eat a little bit more at home. And indeed, some of the spend and spending changes to the family budget that you alluded to earlier, Nick, do mean that folks are perhaps preparing more meals at home and then bringing them into the office, heating them up, and instead of going out or ordering in. So we're looking at a few changes there, but I would say the focus at the moment is very much, irrespective of what you're buying, the focus is still very much on boosting immunity. There is still this specter of secondary outbreaks and secondary infections, and so that still hangs large over the consumers' shopping patterns. And then the next consideration down from that is really around, well, what's best for me in this particular life stage, and especially for consumers that are getting close to the big 30 or the big 40. That's a time for introspection and reflection and some changes in terms of what gets consumed at home and the like. So those are interesting age points where we're still having a real hard look at what folks are changing up and what's remained the same.
Thank you, Michael. I've got a follow-up question for you. This is not from a participant, but this is from me. Okay. And I've heard a bit when I've been talking to friends in China, but also in the media, about this concept of revenge spending. And, you know, I can understand it in relation to some of the things that you've mentioned, but I understand it's linked to luxury spending, etc. Now, this concept came out just as COVID started to get under control in China. I'm just wondering what your insights are on this particular issue, and is it playing out, and how is it playing out?
Sure. So I think after the immediate period of lockdown, it was in Shanghai, it was around 50 days that my residential compound had us sort of strictly control in terms of where we were going and how often we were allowed out. You had this period post that, as I'm sure you will in Australia, of folks really embracing what it's like to be out and about again. And that brought along some really rapid increases in spending for things like snack foods, eating out, hospitality, saw quite a good return off a very low base, right? So that's one element of it. And then you saw maybe the highly publicized Hermes store opening up in Guangzhou and then being flooded. They did something like $2 or $3 million worth of trade in the first day. And folks looked at that and they said, well, we've definitely got revenge spending. I think it's one is the humanity of it all coming out and sort of loving life again. I think that's one part. And then the second part, it's for luxury spending as well. Be careful of having read-throughs for luxury with the rest of the economy. The reason why that Hermès store was flooded in that first day was because a Birkin bag holds its value better than gold over time. And so there were a group of consumers with the means and the financial nous, and dare I say, opportunism to go and stock up on Birkin bags as a guard against uncertainty, not as a sign of confidence. So be careful of some of the read-throughs and do be judicious when interpreting signal from noise. But there was that sort of opening up period where everybody was excited to get out. And as we get into warmer weather, you see folks really embracing some of that, what that means. And I think picnicking is a really nice little signal and insight into how folks are embracing getting out and being with their friends again, but maintaining some level of social distance from other folks.
Thanks, Michael. Let's hope some of that pent-up demand starts to rebound for our tourism sector, which will desperately need that inbound Chinese visitation to recover. I do have a question in relation to, we've got someone in the food and alcohol space who's concerned, as I think many of us are, about some of the actions or some of the talk of trade sanctions between Australia and China, and how that may play out. And are there any views on that? And I know it's the elephant in the room. It's a sensitive topic, but I might just throw it open to our panel in general for any comments, because I know it might be a sensitive topic for some to touch on before I start calling out people. Anybody like to answer that one? Tim.
Nick, apologies. I was just sending an email to one of the participants on how to connect with me. Were you talking about the trade issues, the tension?
That's right, and how it's how it may play out, and obviously in the food and wine sectors, this is obviously something which is going to be front of mind. And any thoughts on that that might be good insight for this participant?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is of concern, I suppose, that there seems to be, this tension brewing, and it's being carried out a lot in the media, unfortunately. I guess if you go back, well, a couple of points to make. On the one hand, the grain issue that we're facing, and the meat issue. There's been some ongoing issues with them, technical issues for a while. But what's interesting is that the timing is now that they're being highlighted, which I do believe is probably sending a message that the Chinese are frustrated. And they're frustrated, I guess, with Australia, but with the world. From their perspective, they feel like they took the brunt with the coronavirus and responded very quickly and did an amazing job in containing it. And I guess when you look at the numbers compared to other locations, it's quite incredible that in a country like China that is so heavily populated, and the public transport systems, the potential for it to spread, they did manage to lock it down. They're I suppose understandably frustrated that despite those efforts, they feel like they're being marginalised. So I think there is some frustration brewing there. We've seen it happen at other points in the relationship, and they tend to identify with some of the larger players to I suppose bring home a point in what's going on. So so I'm not sure that it will spread. There's maybe there's some potential for that for other sectors. You'd watch it, but if anything, the Chinese are always pragmatic, and they understand that the relationship is important to them, and that trade's a key part of that as well. So I think it's a tricky one and hard to answer. Everyone's going to have a different view, but I think it's also, the onus is on us, people who are engaging and doing business with China, to also be trying to get the messages out in Australia that, you know, businesses depend on having good, strong relationships, open and frank discussions. And I think we do need to, I suppose, look at how we engage with China at a government level, and be smart about how we do that, in the sense of how do we send the message and how will the message be interpreted. You know, perhaps there's a lot more scope for early discussions behind the scenes before having it discussed openly in the media.
Thanks, Tim. And it's certainly an area that we'll all be watching very closely. I have one final question that I might just ask Tim Brown. And that is just, we had a question come in about pricing and whether there was any price discounting or pressure to drop prices during the COVID-19 period that you saw.
Not so much around price discounting. I think people were willing to spend, but I think what was prevalent around the time was brands and brand partners that we work with were keen to make sure that they at least maintained position, and a lot of that was done through price incentives or discounting or providing some sort of gift with purchase. We do tend to try to stick away from discounting as a means to move a bulk load of products unless there's some other purpose behind it. We tend to aim for more of a surprise and delight or gift with purchase or increased value to the customer for a longer period, rather than just looking at short-term gains. I don't think pricing was a big issue in the China market through this period. I think now coming into 618, it's going to be something that you're going to find more pressure around that. And as brands from other countries come back online in a bigger way, that's going to be something that we need to consider as well.
All right, thank you very much for that, Tim. And with that, I'd like to conclude that section of the Q&A section of today's event. And I think you'll agree that today's session has provided us with some really practical and valuable insights. A couple of themes that resonated. There are opportunities, but they are niche and linked to functional and lifestyle benefits. So, as Michael said, looking good, feeling good, protecting oneself. Is this a year of healthy lifestyles, according to Tim? And what does that mean? We have a good suite of products in Australia and Victoria that are aligned to those categories and those needs, and working with experts, support ecosystems, like the Vic government, like the experts here today, will be important. And being flexible, which is a critical element of doing business in China, is important. And the only constant thing in China is change. So bearing that in mind. There is demand and there are categories with strong growth opportunity. And certainly Healthmore and Tim have highlighted that in the presentation. But this is still an unsettled commercial economic environment. For example, there are challenges with cross-border e-commerce, supply chain and logistics. So I would like to thank our speakers for today for their time and for sharing their knowledge, insights and experience. Thank you to Tim Dillon, thank you to Michael Norris, thank you to Kathy Liu, and thank you to Tim Brown. I'd like to thank our partner for this event, Global Victoria. The Victorian e-commerce network is a fantastic initiative to provide knowledge and insights on e-commerce, crossing borders from India to China, and topic areas from digital marketing to IP, with the view to support Victorian businesses to take advantage of global e-commerce opportunity. And a special thanks to both George Descala and Lizzie Moffat, and Asialink Business is very proud and pleased to be a partner with Global Victoria on this initiative. And finally, thank you all very much for attending, for staying a little bit later than originally planned, and for participating with your questions. Please stay tuned for our upcoming Victoria e-commerce network events over the coming weeks, which will focus on some other relevant topics, including logistics and supply chain and China's intellectual property environment for e-commerce. We hope that you found this event valuable. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.